is forgiveness. You need God to release you of the required penalty for your sin, which is what Jesus did on the cross. He paid the penalty for your sin. For that awful price for your sin was His own death. And He paid that price. He made it possible to release you from the debt of your sin. The price that Jesus paid on the cross was so great that you actually can be forgiven. And there's nothing more that you have to do. You can be released of the debt. You can be forgiven by the debt of Jesus Christ. Forgiveness is a process. It's a process between us and God. It's also a process between each other when there needs to be forgiveness in our lives. Christ offers you forgiveness, but you have to receive it for it to be effective in your life. Do you understand that? In other words, Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, Dean, you're forgiven, and you don't have to worry about the sin anymore." Christ offers you forgiveness, but you have to go to Him to ask for it, to receive it. Same thing has to be true in our own lives. When there's unforgiveness in our lives, we can't just say, "Oh yeah, you're forgiven," and then it's over with. There has to be an approach to request that forgiveness. So if I have offended Bill, and I do every chance I get, if I have offended Bill, to be forgiven, Bill can't just go around and say, "Well, I know that I'm a Christian and I'm supposed to forgive, so I guess I'll forgive Dan. And Dan, you're forgiven." And I've never asked for forgiveness. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is a process where Bill is willing to grant forgiveness to release me from the debt of the offense. But I have to come to Bill and ask for it. In the same way that you have to go to God to ask for your forgiveness. It's a process. It's a cycle. Bill has to be willing to forgive me. And I have to be willing to come to him to ask forgiveness. Now, if you're this person that needs forgiveness, what do? If you're a person that has offended somebody, and you know you've offended somebody, what should you do about that issue in your life? How should you approach them? What should you do? That's one of the problems in our lives, is we don't know how to ask for forgiveness from other people. We know how to ask forgiveness from God. We do it in prayer. We just go to God and we say, "God, will you forgive me?" And we trust by faith that God will forgive us. But it's such a difficult position for us to be in when there's another person involved and we have to go to that person and ask for forgiveness. We don't exactly know how to approach them. That is exactly the situation that Jacob found himself in chapter 33 of Genesis. He needed forgiveness from his brother Esau. Remember, he had stolen the inheritance, essentially, from his brother Esau. And it had been several years. Now, he wants to make it right with Esau, and he wants to go back. And he knows that he's wronged him. And now that he's met God, he's had this confrontation with God. Our last time that we studied this, the last time we were together, and in chapter 32, and how he met God in the crisis. And now Jacob has this desire to be all that God wants him to be, and he knows that he needs to get right with his brother. How do you do that when your brother is on his way to kill you? How do you approach your brother and say, "Would you forgive me?" when you understand that your brother's on his way to kill you? Well, let's look at Genesis chapter 33. And I want to read the whole passage so that we'll get the story and see it in context. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. Now, Jacob is with his wife and kids and a few servants. That's all he has. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maidservants. Just spread them out. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. Then look at verse 3. Then he himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. "Who are these with you?" he asked Jacob. And Jacob answers, "They're the children God has graciously given your servant." Then the maidservants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, "What do you mean by all these droves that I met?" And Jacob says, "To find favor in your eyes, my lord." Now let me pause here real quickly, because I want to explain what had happened was Jacob had sent on lots of some of his servants ahead with all these camels and goats and cattle and whatever. And he had sent them on to give them as a peace offering to Esau, because he knew that Esau was coming, and he was just trying to appease Esau and trying to gain favor with him. So he had sent on wave after wave of these gifts to try to make things right with Esau. And Esau, I love Esau's question, and you can read into this. He says, "Dude, what's with all of the goats?" I mean, that's what he said. You sent all this stuff. What is it with all of this stuff? And Jacob says, "To find favor in your eyes, my lord." But Esau said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "Oh, please," said Jacob, "if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Now that you have received me favorably, please accept the present that was brought to you. For God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. Now pause right there. Remember, Jacob had stolen the inheritance. Now he had not received the inheritance yet, because his father was still alive. But he had basically stolen what was going to be the inheritance. But now here are these two brothers, and they've both done well for themselves. One has quite a bit of goats and sheep, camels, and all this stuff. And Esau does too. The inheritance that they would have received from their father, they probably exceeded that. And it wasn't an issue anymore. There was not an issue about the inheritance anymore. And Esau says, "I've got plenty. I don't need more camels and goats." And Jacob says, "No, please, man, take it. I want you to have it." And Esau says, "All right, whatever." Then verse 12, Esau says, "Look, let's go. Let's move on, and I'll accompany you." Verse 13, Jacob says, "My Lord knows that the children are tender, and I must care for the ewes and cows that are nursing their young. If they're driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant. And while I move along slowly at the pace of the droves before me and that of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." Esau said, "Then let me leave some of my men with you." Remember, he's got 400 men with him. And he said, "Look, let me leave some of these guys to accompany you." And Jacob says, "Well, why do that? Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord." So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself, and it's actually pronounced Succoth. He built a place for himself. The word Succoth means little dens, or if you will, like when you go to a bazaar or a carnival and you have all these booths. That's what Succoth means. That means these booths, these little huts, if you will. And he built a place for himself and all these shelters for his livestock, and that's why the place is called Succoth. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan. Now we're jumping ahead. Jacob finally finishes up at Succoth. He lets the family rest and everything, and then he moves on. Now he comes to Padan Aram, and he arrives at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped out in the side of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. And there he set up an altar, and he called it El Elohei Israel. So, Jacob now has come and dealt and confronted Esau, his brother that he thought was going to come and kill him. And I want you to look in this passage, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here on this because it's really a fairly short lesson. But I want you to see 7 steps that you should take when you're the one that's seeking forgiveness. When you're the person who has offended somebody and you need to get right with that person, and you know you need to get right with that person. And by the way, there is what I call the ministry of forgiveness. I have found in my own life that sometimes when I seek forgiveness, that God uses it as a ministry to open some doors and touch people's lives. That doesn't mean that you should go around and try to offend people just so you can minister to them. But I have found in my own, and it seems to happen the most like in business type situations, where I have offended somebody. You know, it happened several times when I was in radio, and you know, somebody get mad at me, and if I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong, I'd have to go to them and ask their forgiveness. And it was amazing how many times that opened up doors to minister and to just talk about why I felt it was important to seek forgiveness. And for me to say, because I believe God wants me to be right with you. God, what does God have to do with it? And how that opened up conversations was amazing. Over and over and over again.